Donc il est temps de commencer la deuxième partie de la matinée qui réunit donc les opérateurs, les régulateurs du secteur des États membres qui sont aujourd'hui représentés. Et je laisse donc la parole à Patricia Perennes, qui est consultante à transmission et qui a eu la gentillesse d'accepter d'animer cette table ronde. Merci Patricia.
Thanks a lot. So I'm Patricia Perennes. As you just told, I'm currently a consultant in a company called Transmission. Before that, I worked for 10 years in the rail sector, and I have a PhD on opening to competition the rail industry. That's why I'm here, I guess. And today I'm only working for Public Transport Authority. So I have this very strong inclination toward Public Transport Authority problematics more than operators. But still, we are going to speak with operator and then regulators. So how this roundtable is organized, that's really important to keep the time. So we are going to do that in 3 parts. First, I will ask questions to train operating companies, and then it will be regulator, and then we keep half an hour for discussion with the table, but also maybe the room. So really, I want to keep this time to have this discussion. So really pay attention, because it will be half an hour on this side of the table, half an hour on this side, and half an hour for the room. So that means approximately 5 minutes for each of you. So I will really be making sure, because for respect for the other people around the table, but also for people in the room. So that's the first part. So I will ask one question for the operators and one question for the regulators, and I will give you you can speak. I will say who is going first and after. So be sure I won't forget anybody. So my first question is on this side of the table. So as a new entrant, when you speak for a new entrant, did you face difficulties, entry barriers to enter the market? If so, which ones? And if you speak as a national operator, how did competition affect your behavior as an operator? That's the question. And or something else, when you speak, just take a few seconds to say if you are speaking which countries, and if it's open access, regional train, public service operation, just for people in the room, maybe sometimes they don't know who NTV Italo is, so take maybe 30 seconds to explain that. Keep in mind that you only have 5 minutes. So first, I'm going to start with the first operator entering open access in Europe. So let's go for NTV.
Merci beaucoup. Merci Patricia. Je continue en anglais si c'est bien. So, switching. That's the first case in Europe in terms of open access in the high-speed rail was Italo. Italo started operation the 28th of April 2012. So this year it will be 11 years since when we started the competition. So we start to see a little bit the experience, what's happened there. So the first experience was that for Italo at the beginning was not easy to enter in the market. Of course, because you need a lot of investment. Italo made around 1 billion of investment between 2008 and 2012 before starting the business. And that means that it was not easy to reach the break-even that was reached in 2015, so 7 years after that started to make the investment. So when Professor Montero spoke about profitability, of course, it's not easy to reach the profitability, and maybe it's one of the main barrier to enter about that. And I completely agree what Professor Montero told. And Italo started, and finally in 2015 started to have a better operational things, but also in terms of operation, but also in terms of access charge. We know that we work a lot with the Authority of Regulation of Transport that was created after the Italo started the operation. It was not easy for Italo at the beginning, but thanks to the authority, we changed the regulation in the access charge. Better definition about direct cost, markup, and so on. And finally, Italo, also because access charge, but not only, because the majority of the improvement came from the operational part, but access charge was important cost reduction. Italy started to be very, very profitable. Just to give you some number, in 2019, the last normal year, Italy have 20 million passengers. They have 700 million revenues, so it was quite big. And what is really interesting that what we saw in Italy, that it was a clear reduction of price of the ticket, around 35%, more or less. We have a strong increase of the demand, more than double the demand in few years. At the same time, we have a GDP that didn't increase. So there was not like when I go in China to work or to teach that you have a 70% increase of GDP that have an effect also on the demand. So in Italy, we have this kind of effect that was really, really interesting. That when we analyze other cases that I work, for example, Spain or South Korea, maybe it's still at the beginning. So this is the first elements that we have to take in consideration. The other elements is modal shift. What was also shown by Professor Montero. In Italy, we have a strong modal shift from aviation to the rail, thanks to the fact that we have a competition. We have an increase of competitivity of high-speed rail thanks to the completion of RFI infrastructure between Milan and Rome, especially. We finished to build the infrastructure 2008, the first part, and 2008, and then 2009. Thanks to that, we have the first strong shift to the rail. But then when we have competition, due to the fact that the price was decreased, we have a stronger shift. And I completely agree what Dr. Rinaudo told before, that finally it's a win-win, just to write to the end, because I know that 5 minutes is very short. What it was said before, it was a really win-win. First, because the price of the ticket start to have a strong reduction, as I told. Then the frequency of the train, taking consideration, this is a very important element for the consumer. Between Milan and Rome, for example, we have 150 trains per day. Italo plus Trenitalia. Trenitalia, of course, more than Italo because it's the incumbent. But that means that in some peak hours, we have a train every 10 minutes. Sometimes when I took the train early morning, we have 6:40, 6:45, 7 o'clock. So very high frequency. Then higher quality. And then there's another effect that I think is very interesting. Trenitalia, I remember that was a former CEO that told also that Trenitalia has a strong improvement of the quality, of the efficiency, and so on, also thanks to the push of the competition. And thanks to that, Trenitalia was able to go in other markets. We saw with Rio, where they have 45% of Rio, of course. And we saw in France that they enter in France. So thanks to that, it's not only for Italy that is profitable, but also for Trenitalia that was important to have this kind of competition. And finally, what we win is the rail, because we have higher market share for the rail. We have higher numbers of passengers with the same, more or less the same infrastructure, because during 2012, 2022, we have just the Milano-Brescia that was added. That is a short part of the infrastructure. And finally, I think that it's a good example also for that, and also for regulator, because the regulator help a lot. And the last point, really the last, is a really learning by doing experience for all, really for all. So Italy made a lot of mistake, for sure, in terms of profitability, in terms of operational decision and so on. But also for the regulator was really important to learning by doing. It was a really interesting process, discussion with RFI, the infrastructure manager, discussion with Trenitalia. We have some problem of congestion in some station. We try to find all together some solution. So all of these things finally is for the consumer. And the consumer, finally in Italy, if we ask to the consumer, probably they are really, they are really happy about the fact that finally we introduced the competition 11 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I will turn to Alix Lecadre, because you are like the second entrant in this room, but as you will explain us, I'm sure, there is a very different market, because it's a regional train, so in Sweden, Germany, and France. So maybe you're going to focus on a very different topic, so I'll let you speak.
Thank you, Patricia. Thanks for the kind invitation. I'm representing Transdev as a mobility company in Europe, and we are involved in train operations since 20 years. First of all in Germany, but then in Sweden, Ireland, France now. I will be speaking about staff issues for new entrants. The issue of staff transfer is central for us, new operators in all countries. Transdev's experiences in Germany, Sweden, and currently in France show that a large part of the success of the opening up of public passenger rail transport to competition lies in the ability of operators to have a sufficient number of trained staff on the day we begin the services. The regulatory framework for these transfers differs between those three countries, Sweden, Germany, and France. In Sweden, the employees of the Swedish incumbent operator have no specific status. Their contracts fall under private law. The collective agreement signed between the organizations representing the employees and the employers in the railway sector acts as a framework for the whole sector. The new operator isn't obliged to take over the employees in the company that previously, the employees of the company that previously operated the network, unless it's specified by the public authorities. However, if the new operator chooses to take over the employees of the previous operator, he is obliged to take over the employees on the same terms as the previous employer. In Germany, in principle, railway staff are bound by a collective agreement. This collective agreement is renegotiated approximately every 2 years, and it says that when a line is won or lost, the new operator of the line is obliged to take over the staff. So there is an obligation for the rail transport company to take over the staff, and thus the worker have a secure job, even if the employer operating the line changes. However, they can also choose to stay with their original company and work on another line. It's more complicated in France because opening is quite new. So the regulatory framework resulting from the 2018 law, railway reform, provides for a call for volunteers on the perimeter of all SNCF staff assigned to the operation of regional trains in the region where the line is located. If the number of employees wishing to transfer is insufficient, SNCF completes the list with other staff classified according to their rate of assignment to the line and social criteria as a location of their home, for example. When a designated employee is more than 50% assigned to a line, his transfer is mandatory. If the employee refuses the transfer, he's dismissed by the new operator. But if he's less than 50% assigned to a line, he can refuse the transfer and must be reclassified within the SNCF. In fact, in those three cases, the new entrant company is faced with a real issue of attractiveness in order to have enough qualified staff to operate the services. Staff issues are also quite great for incumbents, but perhaps more for new entrants, as it's sometimes quite complicated to train the whole staff needed to operate the new services. For example, in Sweden, there is a shortage of labor in the sectors, which encourages the vast majority of operators to take on the employees of the previous operator, who already know the network quite well. And we have the same position also in France, so we we prefer to take over the former employees of SNCF because they are already trained, and we think that we can do services another way, but with the same staff. If we are investing in management and in training also. In Germany, Transdev has organized staff with other players in the sector to, so to say, industrialize the recruitment and training specifically for the drivers, so that there is less shortage of staff when we want to operate a new line. In fact, 50% of the staff on a line often do not transfer to the new operator. So it's, I think, over and above the regulatory framework, the lack of qualified staff in the rail sector in these 3 countries leads employers to pay particular attention to the conditions under which staff are received in order to encourage them to transfer when we win a concession. In contrast to this social dumping so often feared by the trade unions, it's imperative that the railway companies offer the most attractive working conditions and service possible. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. So now we'll turn to Trenitalia, and with a very different model, because you are an incumbent who is fighting on this national market, but you are going to speak, or let me know if it's not the case, as a new entrant in France. So then we will have a former monopoly in France, speaking about Spain, but first, Trenitalia.
So thank you very much, and first of all, let me say thank you very much for inviting me today. It is a very interesting debate for a very important issue as the opening up of the market. A short introduction of myself. My name is Roberto Rinaudo. I'm a CEO of Trenitalia France, a subsidiary of Trenitalia, of the group of Ferrovie dello Stato Italiane. And as a group, some years ago, we decided to launch a project of high-speed trains between France and Italy. And our aim was and is there is the ambition to develop our business all over our borders in Europe. And the first outcome confirmed that. What we thought about the opening up of the market and what we lived in Italy has been confirmed also in France. Nevertheless, I have to say that it was a very complicated project with many constraints, and I would say there are 2 main how can I say, different constraints that we had to face in France. First of all, technical constraints. We have to say that in Europe, as you know, there are different technical characteristics in the infrastructures in every country. So we have to take into account the specificity and the characteristics of the French infrastructure. Taking into account that we had to use an Italian fleet with different security standards. For example, to circulate with our fleet, it was necessary to have the availability of some signaling tools that were not available in the market. It was complicated to buy and to have the availability of these tools, and of course it took a lot of time. We also had some difficulties related to the certification of the circulation in French infrastructure, because as you know, starting from June 2019, the responsibility for certifying the circulability of the fleet in the French infrastructure is charged on the companies, on the rail companies, and not by the infrastructure manager. And the problem was the availability of skills that were necessary to obtain this kind of certification. And so we asked the infrastructure manager to help us, and fortunately it was possible to agree with them a contract in order to use their skills. But anyway, if we see all the system in the whole, there is a problem of availability of this kind of competencies, of these skills by new entrants. Another important constraint that we have faced and we have today is an economic constraint that is related to the fare tolls to access the French infrastructure. Just to give you an example, if we take, for example, the most important line in Italy, that is the Rome-Milan, the toll, the fare, the toll fare is between 6 and 8 euro per train kilometer, while if we take the main line in France, that is Paris-Lyon, we have between 26 up to 39 euros per train kilometer. That means 4 times more than in Italy. I understand that the system is completely different, because in Italy some cost of the infrastructure are charged by the government, the Italian government, and it is good. While in France it is not the case, because all the costs of infrastructure are charged on the companies. But anyway, it limits, according to me, it limits a lot the arrival of new competitors, and have all the advantages of the opening up the market. Just to complete the consideration of Mr. Giuricin relating to the opening up of the market in Italy, there were 2 main factors that gave enormous beneficial to all the rail sector. The first one is, of course, the arrival of a new competitor, but because that has stimulated the engagement of the rail operators, including the incumbent, to improve the service, the quality of the service, to reduce prices, etc., etc. But the second factor was the reduction of the fare toll, because after the arrival of NTV in Italy, there was a drop of the fare toll by 38%. And that stimulated a lot in terms of more trains, more offer, more passengers, and reduction of pricing between 30 and 40%. That is very, very important. Just to confirm the fact that it is important to reflect on this opportunity for French market about this issue of fare tolls. And in addition to that, there is the energy crisis, because today we have had an increase of almost 800% of the cost of the energy, because we pass from 56 euros per megawatt hour to 473 euros per megawatt hour. It is an enormous cost, and as you can understand, it is not possible to charge all these increases of cost on our customers. Just to conclude my intervention, I can say that about other constraints, there is the coordination between the infrastructure managers, because the language barrier, for example, the difficulty for recruitment at the beginning, because you know that the skills in the rail sector are very difficult to have. So it is very important to reflect also to create some training schools in order to to attract young people in these new skills. And what else? I think that I've spoken about many constraints. But anyway, I think that in general it is a great opportunity, the opening up of the market. I confirm that as incumbent in Italy, the outcome was very, very good. And the first results in France confirm that. We have overcome the first million of passengers here in France. In addition to that, SNCF has declared that they have increased the volume of their passengers by 10% compared to 2019, before the pandemic. It is a very good news. Thank you very much.
So now I'm going to give the floor to Caroline Chabrol from SNCF Voyageurs. Be careful, SNCF Mobility. But she's going to speak for Spain and for Ouigo Spain, so that's why with kind of a similar model than Trenitalia, so an incumbent in a new country, but like the youngest of the room.
Thank you, Patricia, youngest of the room, I don't know, unfortunately. Thanks again for the invitation to Aurore and to Dauphine University. I'm very proud to be here and take part in the conference this morning because it's very interesting and very of actuality, this topic. In some respect, I feel very close to what Dr. Rinaudo just said about the way to get into a country. We are here to speak about obstacles. I will try not to be too much enthusiastic because, in fact, the project to go and start new operations in a new country is a very exciting project. And, of course, I would say it's full of constraints and difficulties. Moreover, because we're part of a sector, it has been said this morning by Claudio Boito, which is full of fixed costs and big assets that has to be profitable. So the first thing I would say is that it has to be a profitable operation. And when you are a SNCF Voyageur investing abroad for a new project, the first thing that you are required to is to get some profitability and to make the proof that the assets and the train sets that you are going to operate abroad will be more profitable rather than they have been kept in your domestic activity. And so that's the first point. So you have to make the demonstration, first of all, internally with your board, and you can imagine that's not that easy, that it will be a success. So what you need, first of all, is visibility, predictability, and be able to have an economic business plan and on a large scale, that's to say until 2040 maybe, which is the duration of the train sets. So first of all, previsibility. It was very interesting, the presentation of Juan Montero about the framework agreement. Just for the story, when I joined the project, it was in March 29. It was a question of open access. And a few weeks after, we were told that the framework agreement would be in place, and it was kind of revolution for SNCF Voyageurs, because, you know, when you have taken the decision to go abroad for a project, it's like, wow, what is this trick? What is it with what is going on? Because you thought that you were going and just ask for path and choose your destination. It has been quite different. So we will be able to evaluate whether it has been a good point or not. I think it has been something very good indeed, because we are on track. It's easier to say it now. But to go back to the constraint, I think SNCF Voyageurs has been facing two main types of constraint, and of course technical constraints are the biggest one. We have been facing same thing that Dr. Rinaudo just described a few minutes ago, because of course the network is not homogeneous in terms of security equipments of requirements in the whole country. And these things were not completely predictable. We have been facing this difficulty on the Madrid-Valencia road, and it was not predictable at all. So the company has been forced to invest a lot, huge amounts, to adapt and develop new softwares to put them on the train sets and make them homologate, and that the reason why the Madrid-Valencia road only opened in 2022, because there has been this unpredictable addition to the COVID situation that has not allowed the company to develop these soft skills and software, in the meantime. So it has been quite difficult, and what the company made is to mobilize all the know-how, the expertise, the engineers, and you said it was very necessary to have all these skills in-house, because it is very difficult and specific. So the company, SNCF Voyageurs, tried to find out how to overcome this type of difficulty. And it's the same for Andalusia, because you need LZB. It's not KVB here, but it's LZB, which is quite obsolete and not available on the market. So after having written to all the constructors, having written to everybody, try to buy anything, and you figure out that you won't do it, so you have to develop all by yourself the new solution to be there. So I would say this technological part is quite important. The second group of constraints, I would say, is linked to the fact that we implemented this project at the same time when the country itself was doing this liberalization. So it's kind of maybe little maturity of the sector, because it's a great revolution to adapt all the processes to a multi-operator situation. And I have many examples. It might seem very little, but in fact the addition of different difficulties of these types make it on the daily basis difficult to operate. For instance, the parking railways from the infrastructure manager and the incumbent may be in the same workshop, in the same way, but you have no common inventory of those railway tracks. So you cannot know what is available, what is not, how you could get access to them. So it's an example of what should be maybe improved. Another very operational example is when you happen to have an incident on the circulation. You know, the inquiries are not managed in an independent way with a multi-operational process. So it's dealt all by the infrastructure manager, but it should be something which is shared with the operator. It is not. So I think it would take time, and it gives some difficulties to the operator to have his activity dealt on a daily basis in a non-discriminatory way. Finally, I would say that both technical and lack of maturity issues, like for instance, difficulty to have information for the maintenance facilities, are really make it very hard to get, and the solution you have to find it for the technical part, I would say, inside SNCF Voyageurs, what we did, and to try to mobilize everything, and of course with the help of the regulator authority, because it has been very important for us to be able to express ourselves and to say, okay, see what the problems are and how they can be managed, and I would say that it has been dealt very successfully. So as a conclusion, I would say that liberalization maybe would be a success if it lasts for the long term, and that profitability cannot be evaluated, of course, at the very first year. It is very important that the sector give the opportunity to all operators to have this visibility and the possibility to anticipate and to manage the risk, because even if we are a public operator, we need to have this profitability. Otherwise, what we are going to do is to take back our assets and to go back to France, because it cannot last on the long term. So I perfectly agree with the problem of energy crisis. Macroeconomics should be regarded as a whole as very important, and maybe public policies should be more oriented towards helping, having a great anticipation about for the sector as a whole, rather than helping some part of the sector, and as an example, to help coach prices within the domestic activity. It has been the case in Spain with Alsa, for example, a few days ago. I'm just thinking about it. It's not helping the sector, because if you want to make the model switch from car and for roads to train, or from plane to train, public authorities should have this constant application and duty to help the sector as a whole, and not any operator as an individual one. Thank you.
So thanks a lot. So for the last speaker for train operating company, I will turn to Deutsche Bahn because you have a slightly different perspective. You are speaking as the incumbent in a country open for a while now. So it's your turn.
So first of all, thank you very much also for the invitation to this conference. And indeed, if talking about market opening in Germany, I have to dive a little bit in German history, and we're in the year 1994, so 29 years ago. That was the point of time when the German market was opened completely for competition on the rail freight market, on the long distance market, and also on the market of OSP services, or PSO services in English. So that was the starting point, and the challenges for us were multiple at that time. The first challenge was a specific German one. We had to integrate two very different railways, those of the ex-German Democratic Republic, Deutsche Reichsbahn, stemming from a dirigistic socialist economic system, and the second one from the Federal Republic of Germany. Both had some elements in common. Both were run as administrations with very strong political influence, and secondly, both were operating in a monopolistic structure, not only as regards the infrastructure, of course, but also as regards train operations. So then came this rail reform in the year 1994, and it was really a big bang. Competition was introduced, as I said, in all fields of the railway sector. And the second challenge and a big transformation was to transform the former administration to a private law company, and this still is a very important asset. We are run in the form of an SA in French, and these two elements, competition and to be run as private law companies, were real game changers. So that completely changed the mindset of our staff. Of course, this took some time, but the results of the reform were very positive. The basic goals all were achieved. Just to give you some figures, so rail passenger kilometers from 1994 up to the year before the COVID crisis went up at around about 55%. PSO services increased about 89%. Also long distance services, their volumes increased at 28%, and rail freight even increased in ton kilometers at 83%. So the transport volumes were on a steady rise until the COVID crisis, and also market shares of non-DB transport operating companies on the network increased a lot, from 2% in the year 1990 to 40% or 37% in the year 2021, regarded all over the German rail network, or the DB Netz rail network, and in PSO services, as already mentioned, we have a share of competitors of 40%. The second success of the reform was that the public burden was reduced a lot, which was also a major element of the rail reform, because the two railways came from a deep crisis, and Germany in total, its economy was in a situation of crisis. And one outcome of that was, and which still is a challenge, that we had a huge backlog in investments in the infrastructure. And we are still working on that. So in the first years, low productivity had to be overcome. The economy was in deep crisis. and government and parliament expected of DB to be autonomous also in financial terms, to earn its own money. So and furthermore, we lost, of course, significant market shares to our competitors, and one consequence was that we had also to expand activities abroad. That was the time of the great acquisitions of the group, DB Schenker, Arriva. So that was a kind of second phase. But continuously, the transport volumes were on the rise. But that created the problem that in parallel the infrastructure did not keep pace over the years and decades with the rise of the operational performance, which was about 27% since 1994. So paradoxically, the success of the rail reform in Germany more and more has become a problem in terms of capacity and quality. And then the last phase, I would say, is the phase when climate change arrived in the consciousness everywhere, when politics and society recognized the key role of rail. So that led to the decision of the German government to invest heavily, finally, but heavily in the infrastructure. That's the situation where we are now. So in the year 2021, we have an investment of 171 billion euros in the infrastructure in Germany, of which DB takes a share of a quarter. But that means also that intense but necessary construction works are underway, which of course have effects on punctuality and quality. So we try to react on that with a new approach of construction work. We try to introduce what we call high-performance corridors, bundle the works, close down a line completely, but do all which is necessary, even more, which we would have done in the past, even if it's not the time to do so. But if we close the line, we want to do everything to have perfect infrastructure afterwards for a decade roundabout. Other important challenges today is the issue of reorientation of capacity planning, Deutschlandtakt, timetabling for Germany.
Just be sure, after we have to...
Digitalization.
Yeah, be careful with the time.
So that's fine. I'm at the end, so I may join the club of those who are
thanks a lot,
of,
sorry. So, thanks. See, if I'm trying to summarize here, before going on the other side of the table, what I've heard is that what you face mostly is technical constraints. So Trenitalia, SNCF, Voyageurs said that, shortage of staff. That's something said by Transdev, but also a little bit by new operator, open access operator also, with the need of training people. That's what you said, Trenitalia. The other big problem is train access charges. And something else that Aurore said just before this morning, transparency, lack of information. SNCF told that, also Elevate Italo. So that's a big problem. But if I'm listening to everybody, like overall, a globally positive impact on the market, especially for customer, but not only. And there is no social dumping. That's also something I've heard, which is really important. So it means consumer are gaining, are winning. It's a win-win situation, but it's not terrible for the staff at all. And that's what you said, so I'm trying to summarize. So that's one version of the events. So now I'm turning to the other part of the table and asking you another question. So as a regulator, what entry barriers have you identified on your national market? What was your main focus to help this market to be open because of all the benefits that have been explained just now? So I'm giving you the floor. Also, something else important, especially for the students here. Can you explain, as a regulator, if you are like network regulator, a competitive regulators, a rail regulator, a rail and road regulators. Just give a little background, because in fact we have like different situation all around Europe, and I think we have all the options here, almost all. So if you can take like a few seconds to explain that, and we will do the other way around. We stop with Germany, and we are going to start with Germany. So first, sorry, Mr. Otte.
Thank you. We start. Of course, again, my thanks very much for this invitation, as already all other participants thanked. Now, regulation is not a rainmaker. Yeah, we are regulating, the federal network agencies regulating energy, postal services, rail and telecommunications, and I'm head of the rail regulation department. I'm doing this now since 2006, and I can say we are not a rainmaker. What we can do is we can try to give guardrails for the market only to the three main schemes: transparency, non-discrimination, and adequacy. And that's applied to everything that has to deal with access. And that's why I'd like to focus basic statements now, and maybe also asking your question, basic statements about access to infrastructure and markets, access to essential infrastructure, and data. These three bullet points. Now, how about access to infrastructure? Mr. Remmert said already, Germany opened the market for all transport services at an early stage and did not follow the restrictive path of economic equilibrium test. And as a result, apart from long-distance passenger transport, we have a lively competitive landscape, both in terms of competition for train path and for markets, local transport. And so we have 630 authorized railway undertakings in Germany. We have 346 active railway undertakings. And we have, Mr. Remmert said already, competitive shares in freight trains about 58% and in local passenger 33%, but long-range passenger only 4 to 5%. That is the weak point. So we couldn't say that's it, we opened the market, that's it, we are quite comfortable. No, the modal split is we have freight transport only 20% and passenger transport only 6.2% in the modal split. And that's very low. And so, yes, I could agree, let's open the market. And your question, your overall question is, what can we do for the passenger market? Yes, if you open it, even markets in itself for PSO, or if there are profitable lines, open the markets, then you might have similar effects. Now, but this is not all. As we heard, and I can agree with it, we have technically incompatible infrastructures in Europe. And they increase the investment costs for wagon keepers, and they worsen the competitive opportunities of the rail sector. So you need, for good investment, you need comparable technical infrastructures. And a weak point is that especially EU law provides for these differences, since we have grandfathering rights to technical materials that is approved. And we have long life cycle of wagons and rolling stock. And if the approved rolling stock does not need to be technically improved because they have the right to access, and that is within the European law in the TSIs, then you have a systematical problem. Now, new entrants do not always get their desired path for rotations, which are necessary for viable business concepts. That's what we can also realize. However, this is a result of the rules of train path allocation on individual request, and that's what you said, the problem of individual requests. barriers to access now exist less on the side of access rules and more on the side of capacity, decommissioning and construction sites. And therefore we have these new approaches such as TTR and long-term pre-construction, the idea of a hierarchical capacity management, the buzzword Deutschlandtakt as we look at Germany, but it's an idea, I realize now you do it in Spain and others think also about it. Yeah? TTR and long-term pre-construction are intended to enable more efficient use of infrastructure through more forward planning, but also entail the risk of grandfathering of access rights and could therefore make market access also more difficult. So we need to see. It's an open question. Presently, difficulties to entry for long-distance traffic are seen in uncertainty to get track access on profitable path. That's what we are said always. High train access charges and lack of rolling stock, plus high investment costs. That's what enterprises like Flixtrain and others always complain of. The attempt to ease the situation as to charges by introducing lower-priced point-to-point only services in a so-called low-cost segment, by discounts for night trains, and by charge reduction by subsidies for freight trains, these are different attempts to help. And as a regulator, we also try to contribute to make these models workable. In addition, a major factor influencing access charges is the level of government subsidy for infrastructure costs. And these are 50% or 55%. These have the effect of lowering user charges. Yeah, so we are facing a net cost principle. The state covers the cost by 55% and only 54%, or let's say 50%, needs to be covered by the users. So the leverage of the remaining charge regulation is low in comparison of what the state already is covering by the costs. As far as the level of charges in general is concerned, the scope for regulating charges down is limited, since, as has been clearly demonstrated in Germany, not too much, but far too little money has been spent on infrastructure in the past. A more standardized incentive regulation of track access charges with many adjustments of the track access ceilings does less provide for individually incentivizing the infrastructure manager, but may prevent excessive rise though. Yeah? If we do incentive regulation, we prevent a high rise of the charges. The criticism of user financing is the user charges are too high, the markups are too high, the market rate of return interest is too high.
Just be careful with the time.
Okay. And therefore we have a discussion of also reducing the rate of interest. So all this is about just a few, some few more sentences. This is only about access to infrastructure and markets. Access to service facilities has the problem that service facilities, the use of service facilities is bound by long-term contracts. And you really, a train starts from somewhere and stops somewhere. It needs to be parked somewhere. And therefore we have to deal with these long-term contracts that reserve capacity in the service facilities, and that is really a problem. And last sentence, data. Access to data is a third kind of infrastructure, data as the access data, passenger data, and the platforms where data are administered. And this is something that is still not subject to regulation, but this will be a battlefield in the very near future on the European side as well as on the national side. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So now I'm turning to Spain because before Deutsche Bahn we had SNCF. We go with Spain, so I give you the floor for the Spanish regulator.
Thank you very much. I'm Ivan Santos. I'm working at the CNMC. We are I am responsible of the railway area within an integrated regulator as my colleague in Venezia, but also we integrate the competition authority. So we are the model of the Deutsche also. So when we approach to this process, I think I have to say that we did it with taking into account also our competition colleagues, and our approach was trying to balance the optimization of the network. As Juanjo has said before, we have invested as a country a huge amount of resources that has to be profitable. But on the other hand, trying to regulate the infrastructure manager as a monopoly has to be flexible and try to adequate the access conditions to be suited for different business models. And this is why we issue a decision in July 2019 assessing the proposal from ADIF on this package model that was quite innovative and trying to make this balance. So I think in Spain we have a very concrete situation where the opening of the market was simultaneously, and we expected a high interest. In reality, we have 6 companies interested in entering simultaneously in the 3 corridors. And according to our understanding of the framework, there were not clear criteria to prioritize to which operators allocate the framework capacity. And also has been mentioned here, it can be a never-ending fighting and conflict if the process was the allocation of path by path in this concrete situation. This is why we see quite advantages on the ADIF model. First of all, transparency. It was clear the capacity available for all the operators. But we didn't agree in the rigidity of the model. And this is why we impose some changes in the initial proposal of ADIF. So all the operators could request the capacity they wanted in accordance to their business model. But it is true that if at the end of the process there was a situation where, as it was, the request of capacity was 150% more of the available capacity, that, as Juanjo mentioned before, was 60% more than the current services, how to prioritize in this case. And this is why we agree with ADIF that prioritizing according to the use of the network, including all the corridors, was a good idea to assure a full entry in the network. Also, we wanted a model that the advantage of already having rolling stock was not the key aspect of the allocation of capacity. And this is why, before it was, there was a question on the length of the framework agreements. In our opinion, having 10 years framework agreements balance the advantages of the operators who already have a rolling stock compared to the ones who have to buy this rolling stock, because as long as they request more capacity during the whole period, this will balance the higher request of capacity in the first years. So this is what it happens. As also Juanjo mentioned before, we have seen a real change in the market, despite the very beginning of the process, because with the energy cost and the COVID situation, the scenario changed completely. But we have seen different prices, for example, for families to incentivize the modal shift, a reduction in prices, a recuperation of the demand. And now the challenges are how to handle this supply shock, because, for example, in the Madrid-Barcelona, the frequencies will increase from 52 services a day to 90, so 73% more. So there will be a huge increase in the supply, and we will see if the demand can follow this huge increase of the supply. And finally, just a few words on the framework agreement. The framework agreements, it's a great idea to give guarantees of the new entrants on the availability of capacity during a period. Obviously, this period does not cover the full investment of the assets, but also what happens in the middle. So we have COVID when the framework agreements were already signed. So some kind of flexibility has to be foreseen during this period, but also other changes in the demand that has to be adequate in the figure of this framework agreement, and this is what we are seeing now. That during as we are learning by doing, as it was mentioned before, we see that situation changed a lot, and we have to adequate the warranty of the framework agreements to this necessary flexibility of the life when the operators enter in the market. Thank you.
So thanks a lot. So now I will turn to French regulator, because just before it was Trenitalia France, so Olivier Sales for the ART.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and thank you for inviting me at this conference. So first of all, I would like to present briefly IRT. So we are a multimodal transport regulator. We regulate railways, the railway system, RATP as an infrastructure manager in Paris. Also the biggest airport in France, and highways and open access competition on the road by bus. So I'm responsible for the railway part of IRT, and just in order to focus our role, we regulate the wholesale market, the market regarding the access to infrastructure and service facilities. But in France, the legislator has provided us with a general role of watching the proper functioning of the market in the wholesale and the retail part of the market. So even if we have not a binding opinion regarding the retail market, we can provide study, we can provide recommendations to the government or to the stakeholders in order to promote a fair level playing field and a good level of performance for the sector. So, but we have specific powers regarding the wholesale market. For example, we have a binding opinion regarding tariffs, access tariffs to the infrastructure and to the service facilities, and we have an opinion, not a binding opinion, regarding the technical aspects of the access to infrastructure and to service facilities, stations, installation of maintenance for rolling stock, and also ancillary tracks for parking of rolling stock or for the freight in order to make the freight train. So once I've said that, I would say that in France, we are in the specific position to be one of the last country to open up the competition for passenger services. So I am in position to observe and to learn from my colleagues of what has been done. And what I would say is that each country, it seems to me that each country has its own model of competition, and we cannot apply each model to the French market. However, the issue of entry barrier is the same everywhere, and this is very interesting to assess how it was addressed in the other countries. So if we deal with entry barrier, I would also say that there are exit barriers, because in the railway market, as soon as you want to enter the market, you have to invest a lot, and you have to invest a lot in assets that are hardly that are specific assets to the market. If you buy rolling stock in order to provide services in France, you won't be able to use this rolling stock in another country without high cost to adapt this rolling stock. This is very specific to the passenger services, because freight services, rolling stock for freight services, is more compatible with all the European system. But when you buy rolling stock, especially high-speed trains, you invest into a very specific active. So there are entry barriers and exit barriers, because if you are not able to develop your activity, there will be some cost, and that is the main issue we have to deal with. If we want to see the different entry barriers, we have technical barriers, information barriers, and financial barriers. So I will try to be brief with some illustrations. If we look at the financial barriers, we have the issue of track access charges. In France, we have the highest level of track access charges regarding open access competition. I assume Roberto is well aware of that, and we have provided some recommendations regarding these track access charges, because this is a choice to make the user of the infrastructure pay in France. The issue is to make these track access charges acceptable for the retail market. So our recommendation was to work on the structure of the track access charges in order to allow all kinds of services to use this infrastructure. So we promoted in our study regarding opening up to competition that was published in February 2022, we promoted a tariff scheme based on the Ramsey rule, which deals in dividing the market into segments that represent the ability to pay for the retail market. The idea is to allow, for example, low-cost services to be able to provide services, because the passenger has high sensitivity to retail price. It is difficult for our undertakings to put a high charge on passenger. So we have to divide the market into small segments in order to make everyone in capacity to use the infrastructure. And why doing that? In order to provide an effective and optimal use of the infrastructure, which is a big issue, because if we look at the use of the infrastructure in France, actually, the level, the intensity of the usage of the infrastructure in France is quite low in average, and lower than the European average. If we look deeper, it is actually more complicated, because in Paris, you have an intensive use of the infrastructure with mass transit services. If you look between Paris and Lyon on the high-speed line, you have a high level of intensity of the use of the infrastructure. However, everywhere in the country, the level of intensity is quite low. So there is space for new entrants to provide services to passengers and to increase the modal shift to railway services. So that's why, for example, we will soon publish a public consultation regarding framework agreements, because we have studied what the other European countries have done regarding this tool, which seems to be a very useful tool to provide visibility for new entrants and for investors to invest in rolling stock. So this is also our way to act as a regulator. We have, of course, our opinions regarding tariffs and technical aspects of the access, but we try also to push the things, for example, through a public consultation in order to stimulate the debate and to put clearly on the table on a transparent way the different issues, the different technical barriers.
Be careful with the time.
Okay. So I think it was an illustration of the role of the regulator. Thank you, Patricia.
You know, if you want to add something, or if I give the floor to the UK. Okay, thanks a lot. So we are going to finish with Italy, because you are the last, the first market to open, so you conclude. But so I give some time to the UK regulator. Will this, as you just explained, this change currently undergoing? So as a regulator, how do you deal with that? Have you advised on how it should be organized?
Thanks a lot, Patricia, and thanks to Aurore for the invitation to participate today. Much appreciated. It's been a really interesting morning so far. I'm looking forward to the afternoon. As we heard this morning, we come to all of this from a slightly different place at the moment. Patricia asked people to characterize the regime on the left earlier. I guess if we were characterizing the UK regime at the moment, we would say under reconstruction. As we've heard, we've had a program of reform that's been ongoing for 3 years, but because of some of the political changes, I think we've had 3 ministers in 6 months. There's still big questions as to the future shape of the regime, and big questions about who will do what. Nonetheless, we have a lot of comfort from some of the documents that have been published as we go through reform. So the white paper that was mentioned that came out in 2021, consultation on legislative changes that came out last summer, and to which the ORR responded publicly. And I think from those things, there are certain directions of travel that we can at least tentatively begin to sort of say, both for the regime as a whole and also for the role of the ORR within that. So as Tony mentioned, it's kind of an ex-franchise regime. I think I find it hard to imagine a world in which there's any going back on that. We're moving to passenger service contracts as the vehicle for providing the passenger services, and those will, I think, be on a concession basis, so there'll be competition for the market in relation to the passenger service contracts. So the sort of big regime change, though, is that for the first time in a very long time, we're bringing back together the infrastructure and trains under the guiding mind of a Great British Railways. I think, again, everything has to be said tentatively. It's hard to imagine a world in which that part of the project isn't in our future. What does this mean for the organisation that I work for and ORR? I think all of the mood music and anything that we've seen suggests that we will continue to be a transparent, independent regulator for the whole of the rail sector, and that the new entity that brings together track and train, Great British Railways, will operate under a licence, and that we as regulator will have oversight of that licence, and it will produce a business plan. And again, it will be for us to hold Great British Railways to account in relation to its business plan. We are currently also the body that deals with applications for track access. We'll continue to do that. We're the body that deals for applications for approval for open access. I'll come back to that in a moment, but I think we will continue to do that. I'm perhaps slightly more optimistic than Tony in relation to the future of open access. I hope it's not over optimism. We're also just, in terms of who we are, we're the regulator for road as well as rail. No reason why that will continue. One question mark might have been, will you continue to be the sectoral competition regulator with powers to enforce competition law broadly similar to Articles 101 and 102 of the treaty? We are currently a concurrent regulator for competition. A question, given that we were sort of bringing together track and rail, would there be scope for that role? I think the fairly clear answer in everything I've seen in the documents is that will continue. We will continue to be the competition regulator. And I hope that highlights that the centrality of competition to the project going forward. In relation to open access, as Tony mentioned, we have only a very historically, well, let's say over the last 25 years, a very small growing proportion of the passenger service offering that is done by open access operators. I think we've always considered that 1% approximately punches very significantly above its weight in terms of its importance. It has been the sort of competitive constraint, in a sense, at the margin. So even if it's small, it's very important. Something that interestingly emerged under the COVID period was that as all of the other passenger service operators received huge state subsidies, of course the open access operators did not. In terms of how they're faring on bounce back, it's actually pretty comparable. You know, the performance under COVID, in spite of that, was comparable. Bounce back from COVID looks comparable. So I think we remain open for business on open access, and we granted one application in the last 6 months. We have another couple of applications pending, and my kind of hope is that as we move into greater clarity as to the new arrangements, open access will remain. Just one further area that I wanted to turn to, which is specifically on the subject of obstacles or barriers to competition. As Tony mentioned, a big part of the language around reform is cooperation and collaboration and getting the value out of that. And it's very hard to disagree with any of that. Nonetheless, it has pretty significant implications potentially for competition. So, for example, in order to achieve the benefits of cooperation, it looks likely as if it's going to be necessary to invite the operating companies, the train operating companies, to share information with one another and to collaborate with one another on key areas potentially of importance to competition, such as fare setting, timetabling, etc. Hard to disagree. We heard the value of that sort of cooperation earlier. Very hard to disagree with that. But if it's also your hope that some of those train operators who are sharing information will also be applying to be open access operators, and that other open access operators will be applying, if it's also the hope that those train operating companies that are sharing information, for example, in relation to ticketing and are selling ticketing, will be competed with by independent retailers in ticketing. It's very important to think through potential unintended consequences of that cooperation. And I think one of the big challenges going forward is going to be to, on the one hand, allow the cooperation to go forward, on the other hand, not sort of kill the goose by doing that. And I think I'd better stop there or I'll make Patricia nervous.
Thank you. So we have our last speaker for today, but Aurore told me that we have like 15 minutes more, so really be careful to keep 5 minutes, because I really want to keep some time for if people want to ask a question or if they want to add something. So thanks a lot for the last 5 minutes, and then questions.
Thank you very much. It's my turn now to thank everyone here to have organized this conference and invited the regulators alongside the operators to take part in the debate. It's a great opportunity to move on from the discussion that was framed within an academic understanding of this phenomenon, and then go back to more operational issues from our side, including that of regulators. Speaking from the Italian side, I belong to a regulator that was born multi-industry, let's say, in that the regulator is in charge of access to infrastructure, regulation of services, and passengers' rights, basically all dimensions of transport, be it land, air, or sea. So, of course, the regulation of access to rail infrastructure and services is included. The regulation of regional and local rail services is included as well. In terms of the issues that we are here to discuss today, I think it's important to maybe just very quickly go back to some of the points which characterize the modes for liberalization that were carried out in Italy. Important, significant investment was made before any opening of the market was introduced. So significant investment was there. So a conducive environment for investors, for fresh investment to come in as well. A legislative environment was framed. So back in December 2007, the budget law for 2008 provided outright open access in the long-haul market altogether. This included high speed, but potentially was wider. And the third enabling factor was institutional. It was already recalled that the authority was established was in fact provided for in 2011 and established actually in 2013, that is 1 year after NTV had started its operation. And to make up for lost time away, within very, very short time, the authority designed access charges regulation for high speed, and only later turned to redesigning the entire system of access charges for the whole network. And still in 2014, regulation was introduced for access to railways, responding to the issue of visibility that must be ensured to new entrants in a market. I think this is something that we can all relate to. Then in 2015, we completed regulation for the rest of the network. 2017, access to shunting services, which also have to be provided under non-discriminatory and transparent conditions. And then in 2019, access to all service facilities and the services which are provided within the service facilities. So this is the context within which liberalization took shape. Of course, there are many constraints as well as these enabling factors. And also, I think that the UK example demonstrates that liberalization is a process, is not an act. And so it requires enduring action towards sustaining the liberalization process. So we have regulation at the moment that is in place to promote efficiency, transparency in the process of capacity allocation, regulatory accounting and accounting separation, independence of the infrastructure manager, quality of services, and protection of users' rights. The way in which regulation is made is different from the past, in that you don't have outright decrees adopted by the central administrations. you have open participatory processes in which all the parties are involved, and the process, the transparency of the process is again an important resource when you have the obstacles that have been put forward in terms of communication and lack of communication. So I will never emphasize enough how the process changes the way in which regulation affects the operation of markets. So basically we have replaced a way of doing regulation by different means, and we are of course subject to judiciary scrutiny in the same way that any other public administration is. So we have added independent regulators of utilities are entrusted with this function, but they all have to comply to with the same kind of processes. So where are we now? The benefits have been described. I would have certain nuances to apply, but I will not take any part of the floor that in fact competes more to the operators. We do register a number of benefits from the opening of markets. One of them is the leveling up of demands by the users, be it users in the sense of enterprises and users in the sense of passengers. So because frequency has increased, because the quality of service has increased, demand for better services and better quality services has also increased. And these may, and this is the expectation, spill over onto other types of services, those which are still subject to PSO operations, which is not to be demonized, this there, legislation provides for it, but we may push on the lever of more efficiency on the side of the operators and the improvement of quality, as well as the improvement of rights for users. I will also need to recall one item that Professor Otte just recalled before. The rapid growth of data management as a new industry per se triggers and steers change. And it is important to make sure that there are not gateways which prevent, through data management, the better development of the processes that has been set in motion. And lastly, in order to address an issue that I think becomes visible in the Italian scene, which is the interplay between the opening of the market in one segment, which is high speed, and the persisting regulation under different methods of the remaining schemes, perhaps consideration should be given to the redesign of the rationale for awarding exclusive rights when PSO is involved. Maybe this is something that we want to give some further thoughts in the future. And I have exceeded 2 minutes, so sorry.
So thanks a lot. So just to summarize a little bit, then I will leave you the floor. So the first thing I want to underline is, like, I have heard two keyword: need for transparency and learning by doing. And I think there is kind of a tension between these two concepts, and I think that's interesting. And maybe also this idea that it was not easy as it was planned, because in fact you have a lot of technical barriers. You have the shortage of staff. People were speaking a lot, especially in France, of social dumping, and in fact now operators are speaking about shortage of staff, so that was not what was planned. You also have this problem with infrastructure manager, which was supposed not to be really involved in this liberalization process because it's a natural monopoly. But in fact, there is this elephant in the room, which is the infrastructure manager, who was in a lot of countries. I've heard Germany complaining about the underfunding of the DBNets, but please, I'm French, so you're not underfunded. I am underfunded as a French person, because that's true with the track access charge, what you've said. So that's something, I think it was really interesting, because in this European law, and maybe the European Commission will say something, you have this political pillar and this technical pillar, and in fact, maybe the technical pillar was not regarded as important as it was, because I think the main problems maybe are more on these technical barriers even the infrastructure manager is underfunded. So he cannot increase and speed up for technical improvement. So maybe that's a problem. So the regulators, it seems to me, but maybe you don't agree, that they have to deal with this European context and this European idea and the national problems. And the fact that first, maybe it was planned that they have to deal with bad behavior of the incumbent and maybe of the infrastructure manager, but in fact, like this learning by doing process, and maybe the problem is mostly the KVB and the LZB, and maybe not infrastructure manager trying to sneak in the track access charge, traps so that the new operator cannot enter. If track access charges are too high, it's not because like the incumbent is the bad guy in the room, but maybe only because it's underfunding. And the regulator cannot just say, okay, we are going to decrease a lot track asset charges, because if you do that, you just say to the state, give more money to the rail. So that's not that easy. So yeah, what I want to conclude is really this learning by doing. I really like what you've said, Andrea. I think that's what I've heard from today, because we have such different national backgrounds with this European framework, and we see that's not easy. So that's what I want to say. I don't know if your European Commission want to add something, or if somebody else want to react. Juan also want to react. And Aurore, you say when it's over. Your order. So, Juan, if you want to stay, or European Commission, as you want. European Commission first.
I don't know, it's more of a general reaction as to the relationship between what the regulatory framework and what we as Commission, as enforcers can do, and what you as other actors can do. I've listened with great interest about all the market obstacles and the fight that you're putting up to enter markets, and we've been following it with great interest for some time. And what I would like to say is that the regulatory framework that we try to enforce is not a panacea, in that there are things that we cannot do. And for example, we cannot force member states to invest. It seems, it is very sad, but we don't put up the money for that. So we cannot force them to invest in the infrastructure, which is the precondition for creating capacity, but also quality of service. And we cannot force operators to invest, for example, in excellent rolling stock that can also contribute to attracting passengers. So, where we have to admit our limits. On the technical barriers, we do have technical legislation, but we have come up with obstacles, like, for example, the availability of legacy signaling equipment. And these problems prove to be beyond our control. We tried to put together the different actors to find out who could provide what, but there's nothing in the regulatory framework that can give us the power to say, SNCF, now you give 10 items of STM to your competitors. We cannot do that. So we've tried just to make people talk to each other. And we cannot even, because the problem of track access charges was mentioned several times, we cannot even tell a member state, look, your track access charges are too high, you have to lower them. Because we've set a methodology, there's a minimum, and there are markups that can be added, where we say, well, a member state is free to recover basically everything, the whole cost of providing infrastructure services, which means that some member states have very low track access charges because it's their policy choice, and other member states have very high track access charges. And in that sense, there is no European harmonization. We only have harmonized methods, but a lot of it is left to the policy options of member states. So. Yeah, I think I will finish here because I still have some other stuff to say about litigation, and I don't want to start talking about it now.
Last question for Juan.
Yeah, we have been analyzing like specific national situations, I would like to introduce a further element, which is cross-border services. I mean, maybe a word on the operators. I mean, are you facing extra burdens, difficulties for cross-border services? And maybe a word from regulators. I don't know, Luisa, you were underlining the institutional. Do we need a reinforced role for IRG rail, more formal, more recognition in the directives, for instance?
The governance question. It's an open question, and I really, it is still not discussed within IRG rail, quite frankly. Yeah, it's the open discussion whether a European legal entity dealing with infrastructure issues like European network statements or whatsoever capacity needs to have a counterpart on the regulator side. But let's wait and see.
I don't know if an operator want to react, but I think Trenitalia told us something about that. But I'm sure we can discuss that with the lunch. That's what you're going to say, Aurore.
Exactly. Thank you very much for this extremely interesting debate this morning, really. As I told before, we have a huge program.